Hello, my name is Christian Euclid, and welcome to Go Ahead Tell Me. We're happy to celebrate Black History Month, and the theme for 2022 is Black Health and Wellness. So today, we're speaking with Dr. Ebony Butler, a licensed psychologist in Texas who's here to talk to us about this important topic and how it impacts the Black community in the United States. Listeners can find more about our guest on our website, drebony.com. Dr. Ebony created the first ever therapy card deck for women of color, has worked in the past for the Veterans Affairs Administration, and is a food relationship strategist. And we want to welcome Dr. Ebony Butler. Thank you, Dr. Ebony, for joining us on Go Ahead and Tell Me. And we wanted to start the show off with having you give a little bit about yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I am Dr. Ebony. I'm a licensed psychologist in Texas, and my focus is on working with people, helping them recover from trauma. Working with people to help them find their voices again, figure out how to communicate when things like trauma have taken their voices away from them. I'm also a food relationship strategist where I'm trying to help people understand and receive more education about the harmful nature of diet culture and how diet culture has made us more anxious, more guilt-ridden, and inconsistent with food, especially cultural foods. So learning how to find our power back in a heavily sort of inundated diet culture and learning how to show up with food in ways that make us feel more empowered and less guilty and less anxious. So those are the primary focuses of the work that I do.
That's great. I wanted to dive right into the aspect of the culture aspect of food. For many of our Latino listeners, our community, we find the struggle with food consumption because it's such a big part of our culture. This is a connection that I believe that is very interesting with the Latino and the Black community in America, because that is a connection to who we are, where we come from, is being able to enjoy our food, but to do so in a healthy manner. What are some of those tips that you would tell folks in any community that identifies where food is such a big part of their community, such a big part of their culture?
Yeah, one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking about and doing as a precursor to the work is providing a lot of education about how we got here. And for a large group of us, diet culture has been one that's been passed down, from our parents and their parents. But even before then, what many of us don't know is that the roots of diet culture are rooted in racism and anti-Blackness. And so when we talk about dieting and we talk about shrinking our bodies and losing weight, we have to understand that came from a very Eurocentric lens of how to make ourselves better, AKA whiter, and how to make ourselves a lot more thin to be pleasing and less grotesque, less demoralized, and how to make ourselves more moral. So I recommend a book by Sabrina Strings called Fearing the Black Body, and she perfectly lays out the history related to how diet culture started, the inception, and how it's been weaved into our medical industry and how it's continuing to just be reinforced in many of the ways that we live our lives, media, the medical system still, nutrition, how food is labeled, all of that. And the origins of that is really rooted in how not to be Black and how not to be such a monster or such an animal, that kind of thing. So we start there, and then we go from, given that information that you now have, what does that now mean about your body? How does that now inform your food practices? How does that now inform how you define and conceptualize health? Because many of us, especially people of color, are conceptualizing health based on a model that was taught to us, which is still heavily rooted in the medical industry, which means that we need to be smaller in size, and that being bigger in size is related to less healthy, and being smaller in size is related to being more healthy. So what we're doing is giving ourselves permission to rethink and reimagine and unlearn a lot of the things that we were taught about what our health means and what that entails. The next part of the work that I do is kind of having us sit with some discomforts or some truths about why our cultural foods are the ones that are talked about as unhealthy. For example, why are we told not to eat greens, but we can eat kale? Why can't we not eat a certain meat, but another meat is better. Like thinking about these things and really giving ourselves opportunities that have not been afforded to us to really stop and say, well, why is that? And beginning to question a lot of these practices. Why are grits more harmful than rice? Why is rice more harmful than couscous? Those kinds of things when they're all in the same family. And why are we being pushed to kind of eat from a very Eurocentric sort of plate model? And thinking about the ways that our culture is continuously being whitewashed and continuously being minimized and diminished in food, especially when food is such a heavy component of who we are as a people and how we bond and speak to one another and engage with one another, how we show love, how we communicate. So once we have that information, we spend time saying, okay, so now that we have all of this, now that we understand, what does it now mean to be healthy? And not just skinny, not just a particular weight. What does it mean to be healthy? And then we can talk about balance and moderation from that standpoint versus restrictive standpoint, which is typically taught throughout diet culture.
That is quite an eye-opening view of what you mentioned. I mean, this is something that in the last several years, we have begun to see more studies regarding how the medical community has really misunderstood Black and brown bodies when dealing with healthcare. One of the more famous cases recently was with Serena Williams, who, after gave birth to her child through C-section, this athlete who is considered by many to be one of the greatest athletes probably ever, who has been in the world of tennis since she was a child, who knows her body, has sculpted her body to perform at the top of her level, knew something was wrong with her body, had already gone through the trauma of dealing with blood clots, and knew after giving birth to a child that her body was not right. And when she told the doctors, they were just trying to give her something else that she knew was not what her body needed. And it wasn't until they finally went through all these tests, because she's Serena Williams, they had to listen to what she said. They realized, oh, Serena turned into Dr. Serena when dealing with herself. And this is an aspect of our society where you're seeing even a lot of people, having to second guess their relationship with healthcare professionals, or just medicine in general, because there is this intrinsic racism involved in a lot of the ways that we look at health. When you're looking at that, the trauma aspect of it, from specifically with Black women, where you're seeing that they're having a lot of struggles with their pregnancies in the American the American medical systems, how do you combat that? How is that something that you have had to deal with, maybe with some of your clients, or just in general as something to try to fight in society?
Absolutely. And this is such a great point, and a great topic of discussion. And it's so relevant in practice, because my practice mainly centers around Black women and women of color. We're coming in talking about the harm that has been done and the damage that has been done from these systemic issues, like the medical industry, the medical community. So basically, therapy centers around how to recover from such trauma, just like any other trauma, just like being in a car accident, just like being held at gunpoint. We're talking about the impact that trauma has had on their lives, how that has influenced and impacted how they see themselves, their safety, how they negotiate their safety within their communities, and how, just validating that this is a horrible experience and what do we do from here. A lot of the work also in therapy centers around, now, how do I become an advocate, and how do I sort of find my voice, ignite my voice to advocate for myself if I'm not Serena Williams? Like, how do I do that? I'm not her. How do I advocate for myself? And a lot of this starts with education around, or understanding around, what have you been taught about challenging authority as a Black person? Does that feel safe to you? Are there allies? Are there providers in our community who we can speak to that actually listens? There have been many times with me working with Black women where I've had to share my own personal gynecologist with them. Like, this is who I see, this is who I go to, because this is who I feel comfortable with. So it's a very small community. And so providing them those resources of people I've vetted myself to know that they're going to listen to you, they're going to provide you with the best care, and they're going to take care of you if surgery is an option, that kind of thing. thing. So we're sharing, we're talking about, I see this person. So if I have a Black woman come in and they're telling me experiences that they've had that made them feel safe, I'm taking those people's names down. I'm building networks with them. I'm talking to them about the ways that they care for people who look like me, and referring them out to other clients I work with, so we can keep people kind of cared for in this community and in this circle. So that's the ways that I handle it when it comes into therapy. And now when I'm sitting on panels and doing speaking and consultations, I'm talking about this very thing and asking nutritionists, I'm asking medical providers, what is your stance? What is your inclusive model? What does that look like? How are you approaching weight? When clients come to you and they're overweight, but the symptom is not related to weight, what is the first thing that you're saying to them? Like, how are you handling them? And I'm asking questions about the work that they're doing themselves around identity and biases. So these are the ways that I kind of work through the issues. And I'm building networks with colleagues who are asking the same questions, and kind of putting information out there on blogs or social media around ways to advocate for yourself. Because I think as Black women and Black folks and people of color in this country, we have not always been given permission to challenge authority. And challenging authority historically has meant harm, and has come with threat and danger. So letting people understand that, that they're safe, and finding safe places where they can advocate for themselves, and also finding those people who are allies who can help them advocate for themselves.
When dealing with that aspect, that concept of challenging, the powers that be, challenging authority, what are the responsibilities of our own communities to excel, or to kind of get past this? What is the responsibility both of our communities, but also what is the responsibility of, say, the government regarding the maybe even having to realign some of their thinking, some of the known healthcare thinking on some of these issues, to be more open with communities of color?
Absolutely. I think at a systemic level, we've got to do more, of course, at the policy level. We've got to put people in place who are aware of the dangers and aware of the harm. But even before then, we've got to stop and start training people differently at the grad school and education level, because a lot of these ideals and principles are being taught in the education system. And a lot of the people who are informing policymakers and informing people who are creating these laws are educators. And so if we have people, if it's coming through the books, if it's coming through the curriculum, if it's coming through the training, and then the consultants to policymakers and politicians are educators, then that's the root of the problem. We've got to do a better job at training and in our institutions around what care should look like. I know for certain in my graduate school program, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about ways that the mental health system has been built around the medical model, which is harmful to Black bodies and other bodies of color. We didn't do that. So the training that I've gotten has been post-grad school. And I think that if I had received that early on and been given permission to think critically about that, it would have changed the trajectory of my work. It would have changed the trajectory of how I conceptualize mental health, how I conceptualize symptomatology, how I conceptualize diagnoses. And these are the places that this needs to be happening, because once people are out in the field practicing, it is very hard to change the way a person has been trained. It is very hard to change the thought processes. So that's our responsibility, I think, as educators and as scholars, is to do that work there and to build this into training programs, build this into practicums and residencies, build these conversations into the curriculum. I think on a community level, I think we've got to do our due diligence about what it means to be an educated consumer. I don't think that we can continue to believe that the medical industry, the mental health industry has our best interests in mind, but that we need to have our best interests in mind, and we're the ones who are informing them of what we need. And I think the more active stance we take and ask questions, and the more we kind of work through our issues around white coat syndrome and that kind of thing, I think that we can be better advocates. But there's still so much stigma, still so much fear that we have to work through in order to get to that place. And that's why we have we have to continue to have the conversation around getting help, recovering, doing the work around releasing ourselves from anxiety so that we can find our voices again, because so many of us will not go to therapy or not go to the doctor for fear of not being listened to or fear of dying, not knowing that that actually does the very thing to us that we're hoping isn't done. And so we've got to work through some of those anxiety issues, find the providers who are going to listen to us, ask them, do they have other providers that are like themselves? Go in with questions about what's happening to you. Ask your therapist, what's your practice model? What are the things that you've had experience? How are you going to help someone like me? What's your experience? Take questions in. Be the interviewer. You are hiring doctors, you are hiring therapists. And I think the more empowered stance we take, the more we can become advocates.
And I feel that that's kind of like the reasoning behind this year's theme to celebrating Black History Month, which is Black health and wellness. Within our current society, the problems that you're seeing, the issues that you're seeing today with not just the pandemic, but the continuing fight for civil rights, how is the stress and anxiety in the community because of where we're at today in 2022, when we're having some of the same conversations that people have been having, not just since the civil rights era, the 60s, 50s, and 60s, but even before that? That these were things that have always been a problem of society in the United States.
It's stressful. It is highly stressful and it's exhausting. I had a client who was in her 60s, and we talked a lot about how our current times mirror the times that she grew up, in as a child, and how she thought, I just knew that when I was this age that things would be different, but to be experiencing all of this stuff again and to be experiencing at the same level of severity it's exhausting. And we are tired. We are stressed. We are doing well, but as a collective, we are stressed. We have way more resources available to us than we ever have in the past, and still we're stressed. This is a lot to continue to experience in your body. This is a lot to have to continue to endure. And even though we're tired, we are somehow still, I even just said it, charged with the task of righting the wrongs in our community that have happened at a systemic and structural level. And if we're going to be better, that's unfortunately the option that we have, because the systems aren't set up to really fix themselves. And it's us who have been charged with fixing ourselves. So as a provider, as a therapist, one of my missions is to make sure that I continue to name and acknowledge when people come to me for help and wanting to kind of get some relief from the stress that they feel, that I name that this isn't all your fault. There are systems in place that have led to this being your reality. There are systems and structures and institutions in place that are actually responsible for the depression and anxiety and trauma and PTSD that you experience. And so just naming that alone allows people to feel validated and gives people some reprieve, but it doesn't help solve it all, right? And so a lot of us are still carrying so much trauma in our bodies, and many of us are so tired of having to navigate back-to-back crises. The pandemic is a crisis. I spent a lot of time in 2020 naming that the pandemic was a trauma event for so many of us, because many of us don't even know that that's what it is or knew that that's what it was. But this is a trauma. Every time you're faced with the threat of dying, your body goes into survival mode, and survival mode functioning doesn't really allow your body to function at its optimal level. And so this happened for us, and it's still happening for many of us, going on the third year. And so our bodies are just overly worked, is overly stimulated. We are burnt out. Many of us are so fatigued that it's taking a toll on our physical health as well as our mental health. We're going to be seeing consequences of this pandemic for years and years and years to come. So when you talk about what's going on in the community, we're tired, we're exhausted. And so there's a big push and a big movement for us to take rest. What does that look like? What does it mean to allow your body to rest and allow yourself to indulge in the things that bring you joy? So if you look across a lot of platforms, you may see this thing called Black joy, or resting and allowing Black women to rest, because that's actually what we need. And we haven't been given permission historically to indulge in that. So we're indulging in luxury. We're going on vacation. We're trying to find the joy in the crisis. And that is the way that we've been able to manage. We're, just stay afloat in this thing. And so that's what you'll see. And the exhaustion is real. And so basically being a person in the room with another body who's also exhausted, we're talking about ways that we can just actually, how do we just stay afloat? How do we manage? So those are the conversations that we're having. And not that I know everything or I can fix this for you or solve this for you, but I can share your experience as another Black woman that I'm also exhausted. And how do we keep pushing forward? After we've taken a sort of a adequate amount of rest, how do we keep pushing forward?
I know that we're dealing a lot with a negative side of some of the realities that exist in our society. And sometimes that's good to be talking about these things. But the flip side to that is also the mindset of having toxic positivity. What are some of the good positive thoughts or beliefs or thinking behind dealing with some of the struggles that people are dealing with right now, so that they're not necessarily just continuing to push things down inside and ignoring them until maybe it's too late? What are some of the good positive things that folks can do, can feel, so that not every day they feel exhausted, not every day they feel the trauma, the drama that exists in the world today?
Absolutely. And that's a very necessary part of it. I tell people all the time that we don't live, one-sided, one-dimensionally. We're very complex humans. We can experience crisis. We can experience both crisis and joy at the same time. We can experience both tragedy and excitement and happiness and joy at the same time. So we're trying to find that balance constantly. So some things that people can do is, we call it radical self-care. Not the fluffy self-care that you see on social media that's filled with pink, bubbles and bubble baths and chocolates and wine and massages and shopping sprees and vacations. Those things are nice, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about radical self-care that you dig deep down inside, and it comes from a deep place of needing, what do you do that you don't want to do, that you force yourself to do because you know that this is going to help you find that joy, or this is going to help you take care of yourself at the highest level. So for me, sometimes radical self-care looks like saying no to things that I know are going to kind of like bring in more income, but saying no for the sake of rest, or saying yes for the sake of stepping out on vulnerability, putting myself out there, saying yes to projects, saying yes to meeting with people, saying yes to therapy for myself, saying yes to taking on new clients, those kinds of things. Like, what are those things that everything in me tells me not to do, and I do it anyway because I know that gets me to my highest self or gets me to experience some joy? Some other things that we can do along the same vein is, what are those things that give you this spark, give you this hope? Journaling is one. Documenting. There's something about taking out all of that clutter that's in your head and putting it down on pieces of paper and letting it flow freely on paper and decluttering your mind. There's a wonder that happens when you can actually gain a sense of clarity. You approach and perceive the world in a very different way. When you're clear in your mind, your perception about what the world is doing around you is a lot clearer. You're cleaning out a lot of the stuckness that you feel and giving yourself more room to move. You're more flexible, you're more mobile. Another thing that people can do is stretching. A lot of people don't know that we hold emotions in our bodies. So any tightness that you feel, back pain, at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were saying that they were experiencing migraines, hip pain, back pain, swelling of the joints, because a lot of emotions and a lot of the things that we experience trauma-wise are lodged in different places in our bodies. So stretching allows you to move those emotions up and through your body. It allows you to kind of experience the things that talking will not bring you. So I'm stretching to relieve myself of some of this pain that I experience. Emotions a lot of times are held in our digestive systems. So stretching allows you to be able to move in ways that's going to allow your bowels to move, or allow your food to digest in a better way so you don't feel as heavy. And these are things that people don't know when we lose ourselves in the fluffy self-care talk that can bring you joy. Being around people brings you joy because we gain energy from other people. So being around people who support you and who you love, calling people. Many of us are burnt out on Zoom and burnt out on living in this virtual world. So getting around people in a physical proximity so you can get some of that energy and fill your tank back again. Also, decluttering positive, even though this is something that is on the removal end of things, decluttering what you're consuming in social media and the news can help bring you joy and help clear out some of the things that you are experiencing as relates to negativity. You can gain a lot of positivity by restructuring your social media feed, reading stories that are uplifting. That's why so many people have sort of gravitated towards the corners of the internet. They're talking about pets and animals, because those things are bringing us joy in the midst of all of this chaos. So finding those corners of the world where you can find joy and you can feel that everything is not bad and everything is not burning down. So one of the things that I actually do for myself personally is I travel. That's the way that I get out of my own head. That's the way that I see that the world is so much bigger than the reality that I've created for myself. And that's the thing that brings me joy. So I encourage people, find the thing that brings you joy. If sitting with your cat brings you joy, do that. If watering plants, getting plants bring you joy, do that. If putting your hand or feet to the ground in the dirt brings you joy or makes you feel more grounded and centered, do that. So these things that are bringing you joy, those are the things that we have to continue to find.
That's actually really amazing to hear what you're saying, because I just went to my homeland. I went to Honduras and my mom joined me. One of the things that she was talking about, what she wanted to do was raise chickens, and she's always wanted to raise chickens since she was a little girl. And she's going to get a chance here to do that in the next couple of years. And she's so excited just to have, a little plot of land and some chickens in her backyard, in this house that she has down there. And it's just hilarious to think that each individual has their own version of what makes them feel happy. When it's sometimes it could be something as easy as just going out for a run or traveling, or in my case with my mom, having a couple of chickens around, just making noises
Right.
around the house. You created the first ever therapy card deck for women of color. Can you explain to us what that is, what that entails?
Absolutely. So yes, I created my therapy cards and we launched that in May of 2020. Actually, when I started my private practice, I started it as just something I wanted to do, to work with a couple of people on the weekends, because I still had a full-time job. And I said, I want to work with a couple of people, but I quickly found out I was the only Black woman psychologist practicing in my city. And the request for referrals or the request to work with me became too big that I couldn't manage. Also, what people might not know about therapists is that therapists can only practice within the area and state that they're licensed. So although I'm public on social media and I'm engaging with folks from all over the world, you can only work with me in a therapeutic sense, in a formal therapeutic sense, if you are a resident of Texas, which cuts out a whole group of people, right? So now you have limitations, you have access issues, we have cost issues, because now that I'm in private practice, people may not be willing to or able to pay the cost that I'm asking them to pay. So I noticed that there are several barriers, and I was like, okay, well, wait a second. I want to go into private practice, yes, but I'm also finding myself very frustrated at having to tell people no. And I don't want to disservice myself, and I don't want to disservice the people who are working or wanting to work with me. So we're battling cost issues, we're battling accessibility, and of course we're battling stigma. So I said, what would it be? What can I do that will help people feel like they have greater access to quality care? What can I do that will help people feel like they can afford something that is actually a really good resourceful tool or quality tool? And how do we reduce the stigma? How do I get people to feel more comfortable with this? And I say, you know what? And this may sound very strange, but I say, you know what? Black people, we like playing cards. I'm going to take the questions that I ask my clients in session, and I'm going to put them into a card deck. Because one, they are more affordable, so you can access those questions at a way cheaper cost than what my therapy sessions are, and you can feel like you're talking to Dr. Ebony no matter where you are in the world. And so that was my own little way of actually addressing those 3 points, so barrier points that I noticed. So I just took the questions, put them in the card deck, separated the card decks into 3 categories, my framework by which I work with clients. What are those mental blocks that are keeping us from reaching our higher selves? What are those habits that we continue to engage in that's keeping us stuck? And what are those things that we're doing when life happens to us in terms of coping that is keeping us stuck? How are we dealing with our emotions? Do we even know our emotions? So I've created the card deck for Black women so that Black women could actually give themselves permission to do quality level work in a field that also has often neglected Black folks and not done right by people of color. it's affordable, it's accessible, and it's a quality resource. And so that's how it started. It quickly morphed into women asking, well, what about our Black girls? And so we created a deck for teen girls. And then, of course, what about our Black men? So we created a deck for men. And even though Black people are represented in the graphics and created by a Black woman, these decks are general enough to be used with anybody. I just wanted to intentionally center and represent people who have not always had a face in this industry, or not always been given permission to take up space in this industry as well.
I think that's one of the biggest aspects about society today, is that we have to start centralizing different faces into just our everyday life, so that people can, one, be seen. You're seeing a lot of these social media posts of kids who are finding themselves within this movie Encanto, where they literally feel like they see themselves in this movie. For a lot of them, it's the first time, because they grew up on, not seeing themselves that way. And that's kind of like an aspect, a psychological aspect, right? Of being able to see someone that looks like you, that has this your same color, that maybe has some of your same features, that in everyday public life, like that makes people a little bit more accepted.
Absolutely. And it makes people feel a lot more normal. And that is not just me. And this is not just an issue that I'm dealing with, that nobody else knows how to deal with, but that, yes, this is normal. I'm human. I'm allowed to have these flaws. I'm allowed to be able to work through these things, and I'm allowed to give a voice to it, and I'm allowed to be the face of it as well. And just basically validating these experiences as a whole, and that, yes, we can heal. Black folks, we can do this work. People of color, here's a resource for us. We can do this, and we can take up space here. And that is so much, that provides so much healing in and of itself for people of color, because representation really does matter. If I can see myself represented in something, then that can give me hope that I can actually heal, or I can see myself on the other side of this. If I don't ever see anybody like me healing, or anybody like me saying that they struggle with these issues, that makes me more hopeless than hopeful. And so I'm happy to be able to be a vessel by which these cards were able to come to life, because I really do think that they are something that we need in the mental health field as a whole, because a lot of the resources that we see, we know, are created by white scholars, white therapists, and they don't center people of color, they don't center Blackness. And so to be able to do this is life-changing for me and for the people in our communities.
Dr. Ebony Butler. You can find her online on Instagram, Twitter at Dr. Ebony Online, Dr. Ebony Online. You can go to her website. It's also drebony.com. Thank you again, Dr. Ebony Butler, for joining us, being with us on Go Ahead and Tell Me, celebrating this month's topic for Black History Month, which is Black health and wellness. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We want to thank our listeners for joining us this week's episode of Go Ahead Tell Me. Please follow us on social media at Go Ahead Tell Me, and share far and wide. Listen to our episodes on Spotify or iHeartRadio. Again, I'm Christian Euclid. Have a great week. Let's talk soon.